I could not process the fact that I was pregnant. I had spent so many years burying this as an idea and being fully okay with the fact that I wouldn't be able to have kids. So I was in shock and denial the whole time. I felt ugly. I felt unlovable. It was really hard for me to get excited about anything other than the baby being out of my body. I just want to have fun around. What's up, everybody? I feel like I just have to sit down, start chatting away. Welcome to She Toasted, another episode hosted by yours truly, Rachel Wonderly. That is me. That's my name. It's been like a busy last couple weeks. I've been traveling a lot with vacation and work trips, so I've actually done a really bad job at organizing my podcast calendar. And this was something that I was worried about in the beginning of this because I have ADHD. And I was like, Rachel, you're going to start this project and you're going to continue this project. I was going to say finish, but there is no finish. There is no end date to this. But, you know, if you've got ADHD or OCD, you know what I'm talking about when it comes to projects and like starting them and not being able to finish. So that is not what's going to happen with this show. This show must go on. And we must keep chatting about all of the things that are wildly unimportant and important at the same time. I feel like I start every episode with a concert that I've been to recently because I have been trying to go to a lot of concerts because it's like the only thing helping me come out of this brain fog that I'm in, which we will get into. But I have to talk about this concert that I went to because you guys, it was Hilary Duff and she did so good. If you've seen any clips of her concert online, you've probably seen memes that are like, she's healing the inner millennial and blah, blah, blah. I am that millennial that she's healing. Hilary Duff has single-handedly healed so many different parts of my soul this year, solely from just watching her do her thing. Her show is the perfect combo of new and nostalgia. So you feel like you're blasting to the past Disney Channel days. And then you also get like some of her new chic stuff that's pretty catchy, pretty poppy. She also seems to be, because we're good friends personally, in a really good place in her life. Anytime I comment on celebrities as if I know them, it always makes me laugh. But I do, like, from what we have, from what she's put out there, it seems like she has a really good relationship with her husband and she's in a really good place with motherhood and loving all of that. And she's touring and she constantly says on her tour that she didn't imagine being on stage again. So for her, she's probably living a dream that she didn't think was even going to happen. And her dream of touring and singing just so happens to specifically be my literal dream. She's basically living the life that I want. I'm exceptionally and unapologetically jealous of Hilary Duff. That's what it's come down to. I look at her with her kids and I'm just jealous. Not because I don't have that with mine. I love my son so much, but I have struggled with postpartum like crazy. I have had a really hard time with postpartum and not a lot of people to talk to about it. Physically, healing from birth was the easiest part. Birth is the easiest part of the whole thing. Like pregnancy, I hated every second of it. Postpartum, not enjoyable at all for many reasons, but the birth itself, although scary and complicated and dangerous, was the easiest part of the whole thing for me. And yet I still struggle with even things about my body that have been permanently changed since giving birth. I remember right after giving birth, sitting on the bench in the shower in the hospital for the first time, feeling like I was literally sitting on a plum because you're so swollen. And so you can't sit down. You can't sit down because your privates are too swollen, okay? People were like, you know, prepare for the lack of sleep. Prepare for this, that, and the other. Nobody told me about the giant swollen plum that would be attached to my vagina for the next few weeks. So not cool. Not cool, moms. They had to stitch me up. Getting stitches when you give birth. I feel like I'm talking to men when I mansplain this. I'm about to mansplain birth, which is clearly only useful to men, I guess. Sometimes when a woman gives birth, they rip their vaginal hole rips, okay? And you have to get stitches. I did not rip in my vaginal hole area, but I did rip in my vag lip area. How, you might ask? I don't know. This was something that the doctor had never even really seen before. They go to stitch me up in my vag flap, in my coot and prune shoot, and fast forward a few weeks, the stitches, dissolved and went away, but they didn't necessarily take in the position that they were supposed to. So I have a tiny hole the size of like a gauge if you were to just like pierce your vagina with a gauge. I have a tiny hole in my vag lip because these stitches didn't work. I don't notice it. It's very tiny. Nobody can see it or anything like that. But that's still a thing now. That's still a thing that exists now because I pushed a human out of my body. You also have no control over your bladder after you give birth, which was hilarious. This was like, I remember my son had an ass-splosion in the kitchen, and this was like the first week we were home from the hospital, and his dad was changing the diaper. My parents were in the kitchen with us. They were visiting at the time, and poop was just flying. It was just getting everywhere. And I was just hysterically laughing, but because I had no control of my bladder, I was peeing all over the kitchen floor. So while I was like trying to run to the bathroom, I was fully peeing, not like a little drop and I could hold it and stop myself. It was like, oh, I'm peeing my pants. Oh, I'm not peeing my pants. I'm flooding the apartment. Meanwhile, like my son's dad was just like yelling at me, not in like a mean way, but he was just like, help me. Like poop is everywhere. Like I need help. And I couldn't help because I had pee everywhere. So no control of your bladder. But birth, like my birth story was fairly smooth and fast. I was induced and tried to do natural for a while, like 8 hours or so, and then got the epidural, finished out the last few hours with the epidural, fairly smooth sailing. But, the stitches didn't take. I have a rib that is protruding in a direction it shouldn't be, and my boobs no longer look at the mirror, they look at the ground. But all in all, I feel like I was lucky when it came to the physical healing part of my birth journey. I love that I just explained a bunch of like war zone stuff for birth, and it's still very minor. Like men could never. I'm sorry, guys, but you could never. It is crazy. We literally explain things like periods and birth as if it's just like hit a bad shot on the back nine and we'll eventually get over it and on to the next. It's just crazy that we just like as a society just move on from birth and pregnancy and all of that so quickly, as if it wasn't either a major invasive surgery with C-section or just a major life body altering experience. So the first month to 2 to 3 months after giving birth were pretty good because I'm on such a high from not being pregnant anymore. I went back to work very part-time. So for the most part, I was alone home with the baby, just kind of staring into the abyss. I didn't have friends or family close by, so it was less motivating to leave the house when I had to pack a lifetime of supplies for like an hour outing with a baby who was not even going to notice what this outing was. So I was very lonely. My friends would call and check in, but none of my close friends that I'm with all the time have kids. So the isolation started to kick in mentally. I have older friends with older kids, but none of my close friends have younger kids or babies. When I moved back to Utah to be closer to my friends and family, I would have my friends suggest that we go do stuff, and they would want me to bring the baby, and I would internally not be blaming them, but I'd be just frustrated because I'd be like, how can they not understand how complicated that activity would be for me to do with a baby? Of course they would have no way of knowing this. Like, being in aunt mode is entirely different from being in mom mode. Aunt mode doesn't have to think about when the last diaper change was or when the last meal was and constantly be calculating these things in your mind and making sure that they're just like surviving. Mom mode brain is just always flooded with the question of what does this kid need, even when the kid is being taken care of by somebody that you trust and love. So while my friends would promise to help me with mom mode when we would all go do an activity together, they would subconsciously morph into aunt mode once we would get to the activity. Understandably so, this is exactly how my brain also worked before I was a mom with my nieces. And in hindsight, I feel like most of my suggestions to my sister when it came to helping with my nieces were probably not in fact helpful, but it's such subtle differences of what to suggest, not suggest, what to help with, what not to help with, what you think the parent can handle versus what they can't. Like, it's very different what you all of a sudden start to recognize and factor in to certain circumstances and decisions once you are a parent yourself. But being the only mom in my group has been pretty isolating, and my friends, bless their hearts, have nonstop begged me to bring my son to activities. Like, it's not them, it's me. It's me, and maybe someday when I'm feeling low. Okay. No, I do grieve the days though where I could just be in aunt mode. And that has nothing to do with a lack of love for my son and everything to do with the fact that I had to fully bury the idea of having my own kids. And I was completely content with that. And it's taken my brain years to adjust to this new normal. I'm still not fully adjusted. As a young girl growing up Mormon, all I wanted to do was be a stay-at-home mom. Well, and a pop star. But aside from that, realistically, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom because let's be real, the Mormon church doesn't really provide many options for the gals. When it comes to your future, it's like marry a priesthood holder, have lots of kids, serve the church, rinse and repeat. My parents didn't raise us this way. My parents were career driven, so I did have that. But ultimately, like, the community, the environment you're around does seep into you as a child in so many ways. And so I really was just looking forward to meeting a guy who was gonna, have the job, and then I was gonna stay home with the kids. And I was also boy crazy when I was younger and constantly had a crush on someone. So as I got older, this just morphed into hopeless romantic behavior. And when I graduated high school, I had some ideas for careers, but I was still planning on finding the husband, being a stay-at-home mom. This continued even into my 20s when I ended up marrying a priesthood holding guy in the Mormon church that is like an exceptionally worthy, high-end man, a priesthood holding man. We got married. He was going to be an oral surgeon. We were going to school for like oral surgery. So we already knew financially that I was going to be able to be a stay-at-home mom if I wanted to. In reality, when we were married, we started fertility treatment and were told that it wasn't going to be as simple as we thought. So I took that as I can't have kids and went through a lot of self-blame regarding things I had done to my body as a teenager and whatnot. I grieved a lot. I was constantly processing the reality that I may never get to experience having my own child and what that feels like. When I got divorced, I remember still wanting this reality for a bit, the husband, the kids, the stay-at-home mom life. I never fully thought about what that would entail though. I don't think anybody can really wrap their head around what being a stay-at-home mom would be like unless you're in that position, even if you're like a full-time nanny, because the mom role just never ends, right? But I never thought about what it would entail. I just knew that I didn't want to work a purposeless job that I hated, and I was constantly chasing purposes in my jobs post high school. I also had many entrepreneurial ideas and wanted to chase those, and I thought being a stay-at-home mom would allow me to pursue these dreams. Now that I know what being a stay-at-home mom is like, there's no ability to start a business really in that time frame, or it'd be really hard. So over the next few years, I was heavily involved in my faith. I was working at a church. My career was aligned with my passion. I was presented with an entirely different future for myself that I never thought I would be able to have. This future was going to allow me to pursue a career that included my top two passions, which is music and helping people. I realized over the course of a few years of doing this that I actually didn't need the romantic ending or the kids that I thought I needed. I was perfectly content with what I was doing at the church. I was perfectly content with diving into building up a team of people and having those people be the people in my life that I, pour into, like my kids in a sense. I was able to really spread myself out capacity wise when it came to helping my friends and being there for my friends. I felt like I had a good balance in my life of career, passion, friends, and I really felt a genuine peace when it came to the idea that I may be single and childless for the rest of my life. I was actually it wasn't even a thing anymore. It was just something where it's that's just what it's going to be. My focus is going to be Jesus and everything else that I was focusing on at the time. And that's that. I was also surrounded by a lot of kids in our church community. And so I was able to be in aunt mode a lot. I loved attending the birthday parties and I was in charge of things pertaining to kids camp. So I felt like I was getting my fix with kids, but then I could go home and rejuvenate. I was very ill prepared for the 24/7 demand that being a mother would require. I know that seems naive, but it really did take me fully stepping into the role of mom in order to realize just how much of a sacrifice it truly is. And I only have one. We had to go to the dentist the other day, and I hate going to the dentist for myself. So now I'm going to the dentist, once a year or whatever for myself, and then also for my kid. And I only have one kid, so I can't imagine having to do all these appointments that I already hate doing, 4 times, 5 times. All these people with so many kids out there, all you hardcore moms with all you kids. But I remember being a few months postpartum and not being able to refer to myself as mom or mommy. I thought it was weird and foreign for people to refer to me as a mom, as anybody's mom. People would call me my son's mom and I would just be like, nope, what? No, what do you mean? I actually hated it. I didn't feel like a mom in my head. So when people would refer to me as a mom, it felt like I was just out of alignment with myself. As my son started speaking, using this language became easier because I would describe myself to him as mommy and he would start to say, mom and mommy. So then it became normal. Now I don't even think about it. But I remember for almost the first entire year of his life, trying to get used to someone referring to me as a mom. Backing up to when I actually gave birth, without exposing too many details, at the time that I gave birth, my son's dad and I were in a rocky place. And I essentially knew at the time that we probably weren't going to end up together. This is obviously not an ideal situation for anyone, but for me specifically, it created an attachment issue that I carried throughout pregnancy. My entire pregnancy was a blur. I was incredibly detached from my body. I am lucky enough to say that I never struggled with body dysmorphia in my life, but being pregnant definitely did a number on me in that category. I was in shock and denial the entire time, just from solely being pregnant. I could not process the fact that I was pregnant. I could not process the fact that I was pregnant. I had spent so many years burying this as an idea and being fully okay with the fact that I wouldn't be able to have kids. I was just in shock. So I was in shock and denial the whole time. I felt ugly. I felt unlovable. It was really hard for me to get excited about anything other than the baby being out of my body. So baby showers, photo shoots, all the cute traditions were not on my radar. I was just mentally on an island by myself where I felt like I had to hide away until the birth. Just hide away, just go hibernate until I gave birth. This partially had to do with what was going on with me and my son's dad, and then partially because I was now facing this reality of bringing a human into the world, and I truly was not sure if that was something that I even wanted for my life anymore. I can honestly say I have never felt more trapped in my own body than when I was pregnant. Side note, wouldn't you hate that for anybody? Like, wouldn't you just hate for someone to not feel like themselves in their own body? Like, wouldn't you hate, conservatives, for someone to feel disgusting or lost every time they looked in the mirror? Wouldn't you just feel so sad for that person and not want that for their life? Right? Conservatives, we'd hate that for anybody, right? Anyway. This obviously created a detachment for me from myself to the baby when he was first born. So while I was stoked to no longer be pregnant, I was holding this tiny human that I did not know or recognize. And I still could not even believe that I had just created and birthed a human being. I was mind blown. The second he came out, he was brought to the nurse's table where my son's dad followed him. And I was just laying there with my hands kind of just up, shaking. And I remember just looking at the ceiling, shaking, and tears were running down my face. And I remember thinking that it wasn't because I was overwhelmed with joy. It's because I was in shock. I was just in pure shock. My body just shut down. So moving back to Utah, being around friends and family, that was like the best thing we could have done. Myself, my son's dad, and my son's dad's mom all decided to move back to Utah, where we would move into separate homes at this point, but we'd all at least be able to stay in the same 10-minute radius to see my son. This reset my postpartum a little bit because I was able to be in a new environment with lots of support, and I was back around my people, which was a good distraction from the anguish that I was feeling. Like, I had a lot of depression and anxiety, but keep in mind, this was also the beginning of 2025, and the Trump administration had just started unleashing terror across the land. So I was dealing with stuff internally, but I was also watching our country rip families apart and fund the starvation of children overseas. And my new mom heart just could not take it. Like, truly could not take it. I thought about how hard it was for me to go back to work for the first time and not be able to put my son to bed, and he's used to me putting him to bed. I was thinking about that moment and how much anxiety I had just from that. Like, he's totally fine. He's with his dad. He's in his own bed. I'm going to see him the next day, and I know I'm going to see him the next day. I had an evening job, and I still was like anxious and sick to my stomach and wondering, like, he can't communicate. He's a baby. Is he going to know where I went? Now I'm seeing moms be taken from their kids, ripped from their kids' arms, and thrown in concentration camps for being behind on paperwork. And now we know that not even that's the case, because most of these arrests have been unlawful, and majority of them have been people who are not criminals and who are doing things the right way. So between watching mothers getting their kids ripped from their arms and mothers having to watch their children starve to death in Gaza, knowing that there's humanitarian aid just right down the way. And by the way, this was funded by the Biden administration and the Trump administration, so I don't want to hear it in the comments when it comes to this, that, or the other. Fuck them both. It was too much. It was too much to see. It was too much to process. It was too much to empathize with. I would spend some days just in my bed crying because I didn't know what to do. And I would just tell myself, like, this is postpartum, this is postpartum. But at the same time, you know, you're also seeing atrocities, and I'm a human being. So I had to figure out, like, how much of this is a chemical imbalance due to giving birth and how much of this is circumstantial. But my son turned 2 in May, and I've been told that it takes about 2 years for your brain to go back to fully normal, in quotes, after giving birth due to hormonal changes and whatnot. Over the course of those first 2 years, I did experience a lot of suicidal ideation, a detachment from my body and my own brain, and in many ways, just a lot of grieving the life I thought I would have while adjusting to this life I now live and learning how to enjoy it and be present. again. I was reading a book this week called How Will You Measure Your Life, which is hilarious because I do not read books, dude. I got ADHD and I read, news articles and work stuff, and then not books, but I felt like I really needed to pour into my brain. So I picked up this book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And it talks a lot about the decisions we often make when we choose work over family, while simultaneously saying that family is our number one priority in life. A lot of times our actions don't align with our priorities in life. And I've had to come face to face with this as a single working mom, because most of the things I do these days, like working, meal prep, starting a company, I say these are all things that I'm doing to give him a better life. But in doing that, I sometimes forget to be present with him. He's not going to remember how many sandwiches I made for him, but he is probably going to remember if mommy never was home because she was always working. So it's something that I'm trying to be mindful of. And with that said, stay tuned for part 2, where we continue the convo of mindful living postpartum. And even if you're a man and you've never given birth, we're still going to dive into stuff that I do feel is relatable, just when you feel like you're detached from yourself, and kind of how to get that back. And I'm diving into strategies myself for how to get my brain back and how to live my life to the fullest, as cliche as that sounds. And hopefully on this journey, we can all kind of help each other with suggestions and things that have worked for us. Thanks for joining me on another episode of She Toasted. I can't wait to dive more into postpartum and birth and maternity leave and the politics of it all and all that jazz, which we shall. But thanks for joining me for this one. And a toast with my Sauvignon Blanc that I normally put grapefruit juice in, but we don't have juice. A toast to anybody who has given birth. It is no small feat. It is not something that anybody should be forced to do or take lightly. Hashtag pro-choice till the end of time. A toast to you parents, especially the single ones. You are doing the Lord's work out there, okay? And I hope you feel a little bit less alone. And there are so many people who are struggling with postpartum, and I am terrible at reaching out for help. Terrible. So I'm going to try to hold myself accountable to do that better, and hopefully you guys will do the same if you're struggling with that as well. If you have struggled with postpartum before and you either have some advice to give or just some solidarity to throw my way, feel free to email me at rachel@shetoasted.com, and I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, guys, we'll see you for another episode of She Toasted on Toasted Tuesdays. We'll see you next week.